Do we have the right to die? Although suicide is no longer a crime in Australia, assisting anyone in any way to take his or her own life is still a serious criminal offence, and the penalty is 10 years jail. Even if the assistance is given for the most humane and compassionate reasons, the law as it stands determines that it is a crime. Because of this, there's a renewed push by some who are terminally ill, some doctors, lawyers, family and carer organisations in Australia for reform to establish in law the right to die. Now, after many failed attempts over the years, new efforts to change the law are currently before the South Australian, Tasmanian and New South Wales parliaments. Why?
I try and be positive, but I've got to the stage this year where things look bleak.
Loredana Alicio Mulhall, 62, has been wheelchair-bound for 7 years now. 22 years ago she was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis. She has a master's degree in political science. She's had a lifetime career as a language teacher, English, Italian and French. Assisted by her Japanese carers in her Pyrmont flat, Loredana has had to confront what she says is the agony of her existence. And this is why you want to speak out about voluntary assisted suicide.
Absolutely.
When did you come to this realisation?
Probably about a year ago.
She had been coping with the cruel relentlessness of her paralysis, first in her legs, then in her right arm. Her left arm was functional for many years, allowing her the joys of the internet and to stay in touch with her adult children by Skype and email on her computer. But 10 months ago, the paralysis then spread to her left arm. Still intensely aware and articulate, Loredana Alicio Mulhall has found herself trapped in her own body.
Even though I've tried very hard to think about what can I still do, what do I enjoy, there's not much left that I can do. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The fact that my intellect is okay makes it better and worse, because sometimes I don't really mean it, but sometimes I think if I had Alzheimer's, that's a terrible thing to say, but you know, I'm desperate at times. I just can't stop thinking there's not a lot more I can do. I can't physically do anything.
If voluntary assisted suicide was legally available, how would Loredana choose to end her life?
Now, how would I do it? Injection or tablets or pills or something? But definitely, probably injection. And I have all my family around me, mainly my kids, and I would speak to everyone, my friends, make peace with the world or whatever, and I see it as a very peaceful. I actually see it as wonderful, not having this constant agony and pain. We have a lot more than just physical pain, although that's bad enough. We have emotional pain, which is in itself, depending on who it is, more or less devastating. And together, it's just unbearable.
I'll introduce our first speaker who'll talk.
At a Dying with Dignity forum at Parliament House, we met John and Jessie Hogan from the Central Coast. John, 67, a former coal miner, has been diagnosed with liver and bowel cancer. He's been told that without radical surgery, he has 6 months to live. Mr Hogan wants the legal right to choose to die with medical assistance if necessary in the event that he faces prolonged suffering.
Well, I know that palliative care is available, but it doesn't suit everybody and it doesn't cure everybody. There's no cure for what I've got. I'm hoping that following operations that I might have a few more years, of course. But it's my choice. The choice of people who decide to have palliative care and go the whole course, that's their choice. And I fully support them. But it's my choice that when the pain comes, the quality of life goes, that I would like to have to choose an assisted death.
For Jessie Hogan, the right of her husband John to die painlessly by assisted suicide at a time of his choosing, while confronting, seems justified. She has seen loved ones in anguish and agony before.
We respect the right of those who choose to linger and suffer, but I watched my grandmother die with cancer, and I was 16 at the time, and it lives with me every day. My brother has dementia, and he was diagnosed at 58. He's now 65 and in a home. It's a terrible disease, and we joined Dying with Dignity because of my brother in England who has dementia. And then, unfortunately, John was diagnosed with it.
It's been said that if we legislate to allow assisted suicide, voluntary assisted suicide, it would open the floodgates and that there would be abuse.
That is ridiculous, because the studies overseas in Europe and Oregon and the United States have shown that actually suicide has gone down. And people who are actually given an Ebutal, 1/3 in Oregon don't even take it. They've got the peace of mind that they've got the drug, that they can make their own choice when the time is right. So that it's only a fear campaign a lot of people are putting out, and it's based on nothing. The truth is that once you have this drug, you'll make your decision when it suits you, and suicide has actually gone down.
I've been asked to speak about some of the legal aspects that touch on the discussion that we're having this afternoon.
Many lawyers now believe that the time has come to reform the law to decriminalise assisted suicide in clearly defined circumstances.
Suicide is no longer an offence, but it's still an offence against the Crimes Act to aid, abet, counsel or incite anybody to commit suicide or to attempt suicide, and it's regarded as a serious offence. It carries a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment, and it doesn't matter in what circumstances that occurs. So I like the term voluntary assisted suicide because it introduces the three elements that I think need to be focused upon in this argument.
In 2002, Toukley Central Coast resident Fred Thompson, then 68, walked into Gosford Police Station and reported having assisted his wife of 43 years, Katerina, to die.
I said, "You know what you're asking me to do, dear?" She said, "Yes." I said, "OK, if that's your wish, I will carry it out." So I did.
Suffering for years from MS and pleading to go, by agreement with her husband, she had taken a large dose of Valium and sleeping pills, after which Mr Thompson smothered her with a pillow. Mr Thompson was charged with murder. Plea bargaining between the public defender and the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery, followed.
He had put a pillow over her face when she was asleep with the intention that she would die, and that is murder under our law. And he admitted to everything that he'd done, explained it all fully. He was charged with murder. He was committed for trial on the charge of murder, and in negotiations between the prosecution and the defence, in due course he pleaded guilty to aiding suicide. Now, I had regard to the law, of course, but also to the prosecution guidelines, which enable discretionary decisions to be made if there are certain public interest considerations at play. In the end result, he was dealt with before a magistrate and he was sentenced to a bond to be of good behaviour. And I think that was a totally satisfactory outcome. That is, no real penalty.
Voluntary assisted suicide via amendment should be a first step in law reform, Nicholas Cowdery says. It would cover those people, like Loredana Alicio Mulhall, clearly capable of giving conscientious direction to surrender her right to life.
It was, however, the last 9 days of his life that were completely tortuous to us. Alzheimer's is known as a disease that robs people of their mental faculties.
But what about people with Alzheimer's disease? Dementia takes away a person's capacity to give informed consent. Photographer Mike Bowers, a segment host on the Insiders program, watched as his father, the Herald journalist Peter Bowers, suffered Alzheimer's for years.
The disease attacks the brainstem and it removes the ability to swallow. This is when the horror show really started. Dad basically starved and dehydrated to death. You do feel conflicted. Part of me wanted to protect the faint glow and part of me wanted to snuff it out and end his pain. Bloody shoot me, Mikey kept ringing in my ears. I thought more than once about doing the pillow snuff, and no son should have to do that. I just can't see the point in watching someone you love so deeply fight and struggle for every last breath. I'm not a legislator and I'm not a lawmaker. I know there has to be safeguards. Why we couldn't just have legally increased Dad's morphine once he lost his ability to swallow, I don't know. It was never going to be anything but a horror show once this happened. Surely this is the one great human right we should all have, the ability to decide when there is no hope left, when to end the suffering.
I would, for my own part, like to see it start with truly voluntary euthanasia, that is, somebody who has the right to life freely and openly and voluntarily deciding to surrender that right. But there are arguments that it should be extended to people who have life-threatening conditions or whose quality of life is very poor and who are suffering from dementia and who are therefore not in a position to be able to voluntarily make that choice. And there are issues about whether or not some prior direction that might have been given about those circumstances should be put into effect and so on. And of course the other area is the voluntary surrender of life even when you are not suffering from some terminal condition or something which renders your quality of life unlivable. So for a jurisdiction that is taking the first step, I would suggest that that first step be the voluntary assisted suicide and that we get that under the belt and then see what the community thinks about these other inroads and avenues into people's exercise of choice.
Thank you so much, Yori.
Voluntary euthanasia reform will be debated in the New South Wales Parliament next year. For her part, Laura Dana Alicio Mulhall invites the Attorney-General and any interested MP to visit her Pyrmont flat to hear her personal plea for her right to die.
They need to speak to people like me. Now, that is, look, without that, we'll just have the same problems.